You're unmuted.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Mike Carpenter, Home Manager for the Pennsylvania DCED program, Home Program. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Just going to go over a few small items first before we get into the webinar. Wanted to remind you that we did send a community development and housing alert out this month with the home application deadline, which is October 5th of 2018. Want to make sure everybody understands that that October 5th date requires the application to be here by October 5th and not a postmark date. The most recent round of home contracts that we funded totaled 28 contracts, totaling a little over $8 million, so we had a very robust round of applications. And right now, DCED is in a position where we will be waiting on the 2018 allocation following this round. So we might have some difficult decisions to make this round in terms of who will get funded and, unfortunately, who will not get funded because we have limited funds right now. That being said, your presenters for this afternoon are, of course, myself and Dave Jordan. The webinar should take approximately 60 to 90 minutes. And I just want to hold for a second. I would ask that you all mute your phone lines so, of course, there's no bleed over into the presentation. There is a box for both questions. You can certainly ask your questions. What we're going to do is, following today's webinar, the home staff here will review those questions, and we will respond to those questions and post them on the DCED website, along with the webinar that is being recorded, and that way you can both listen to excerpts from the webinar or the entire webinar if you'd like, and you will also be able to see one common question and one common answer so everyone can see the same questions and answers. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is the Home Program Application Guidelines, the Section 1 overview. I'd ask you all to please take note that the 2018 home application now contains 6 appendices. This was done to accomplish a reduction in the repetitive and redundant language in each individual appendix. Appendix 1 now contains the common information required of each priority activity appendix 2 through 6. So as you can see on the screen, Appendix 1 is again the general application information that must be completed, and then depending on the priority activity 2 through 6 that you're applying for, the information in that individual appendix would also need to be completed. So we appreciate your review of that because it changed from last year, and we felt it important to, quite honestly, kill less trees and consolidate and refine the application process. So we have the general application information is now Appendix 1. As you are probably aware, home is the primary tool used to support the mission of creating and maintaining affordable housing in the Commonwealth. We only contract with units of general local government. Units of general local government, or UGLUGs, as we like to say with our acronyms, can apply on behalf of another entity, but the UGLUG is responsible for oversight of any municipality that they would apply for. So if your example, and I'm going to use Dauphin County because that's where we're at, if you're Dauphin County and you're applying for the city of Harrisburg, as the applicant, the unit of general local government is responsible. The contract would then be between the unit of local government and DCED, and you're responsible for oversight if you're applying on behalf of a municipality. within your county. Why the need for the revised home application? We basically prioritized our activities. We've looked at housing case studies. We've consulted with both housing advisory committees and various other organizations to come up with what the priority needs are in the Commonwealth, and that is how we based our priority activities. And the priority activities are listed as such in both our consolidated and annual action plans that are, of course, public information, and you can review both the consolidated action plan as well as our application kit. As you are aware, the revised home application should better position both DCED and you, the subrecipient, to meet the timeliness and commitment expectations. Currently, the commitment expectations or requirements have been suspended through 2019 by HUD, but DCED's approach we're not sure if they're going to be reinstated after 2019 or not. So our focus is going to be to maintain those commitment deadlines so we're not basically shocking everyone when they come back into place. So you have commitment requirements and contract expenditure requirements, and we urge you to look at both of those. As you're probably well aware, target leverage and impact is no longer a priority criteria for the funding of a home application. With that said, if you have current revitalization plans, economic development, growth going on in your community, it's certainly a good idea, and we would encourage you to continue to target those areas. Of course, one of the driving factors to both economic and revitalization efforts are, of course, housing. So if you're doing work in that respect, we certainly would accept and be willing to look at applications that are targeting their home funds in areas where you have current activity taking place right now. But again, it's not a priority. The DCED home program is, of course, a competitive program. It's not entitlement funds like the CDBG program. We do occasionally get calls from units of local government that think this is an entitlement program, and it's not. It's a competitive basis. Applications are scored. There's risk assessment involved. So we do a great deal of work on this end, and we wanted to make you aware that, again, it is a competitive process. The home program method of distribution is, again, listed in both consolidated and annual action plans, and both plans are available on the DCED website. It's listed there for you, www.dced.pa.gov. I would encourage you to look at both the consolidated and action plans and look at the method of distribution for home. You'll see that we are meeting our priority needs. Annually, with our home allocation, we generally provide up to 35% of our home funds to PHFA, and that's for large multifamily housing development as part of their Penn Homes and low-income housing tax credit program. We can provide up to 50% if needed. That is also in the plan. Along with the multifamily rental development, PHFA also carries out a tenant-based rental assistance program, and they do have a home buyer component that they use Penn Home Funds for. So you certainly can, if need be, apply to PHFA to talk to them about their PBRA program and or some of their home buyer components. And certainly I'm sure most of you are aware that PHFA handles large multifamily rental housing development, affordable rental housing development. We released the updated home application guidelines on August 7, 2018 via CD&H alert. And again, the next round home application deadline is October 5th of 2018. Wanted to go over that home PJs receiving less than $500,000 in annual home allocation may apply to DCED for our home funds that meet one of the outlined priority activities. provided that 100% of that PJ's most recent home allocation is also committed to the same DCED home application and the priority activity in questions. Home PJs receiving more than $500,000 are eligible to apply, but only for those activities that meet the 15% SOTO set-aside requirement. Of course, we have opened the home program up to home PJs that meet specific criteria, and that, again, is listed in both our consolidated and action plans and the home application itself. This was done to actually spur competition, growth, accountability, and production of affordable housing. Priority consideration will still be granted to, let me rephrase that. Priority consideration will be granted to non-home PJs applying for DCED home funds. However, in the event that DCED does not receive adequate or sufficient applications from non-home PJs, DCED reserves the right to award funds to PJs as warranted. I think it's fair to note that if we get an application from a non-PJ and that application doesn't score well or meet the mark, it's missing criteria from the application, and we have an application from a PJ that does meet the mark and does have all the supporting documentation, that would be a basis for us to award to a home PJ as opposed to the non-PJ. Again, we're focused on the balance of the state, but if we don't have sufficient applications or applications that meet the mark from the balance of the state, we can then, of course, turn to the home PJs that may be interested in submitting. So we're going to talk about the priority of housing activities. Rental housing, new construction and or rehab is a priority activity. Home buyer acquisition with or without rehab. And now we have the home weatherization deferral program. Last year it was a pilot. It's no longer a pilot. It's a standard priority activity for us now. Moderate activity is existing owner-occupied housing rehab. And a low priority activity for us right now is single-family affordable housing. And I want to point out that does not mean that you cannot submit an activity or an application for single-family affordable housing, and that does not mean your application will not get funded. What it does mean, however, if we get a number of priority activity applications and they meet the mark, they'll come first, and they will get a better score because they're meeting our priority and the state's priority needs. So if you have any questions on that, you can certainly talk to myself or any one of the home program managers. An overview of the home application process. Again, for administration purposes, applications must be submitted by units of local government, including applications on behalf of other public agencies, nonprofit organizations, and or developers. Given the complexity of the program, the minimum application amount will be $50,000, and that will only come into play, quite honestly, with SOTO operating funds. And while we're speaking about SOTO operating funds are only awarded if the applicant in question meets the SOTO certification criteria and they receive home funds for an activity that is meeting the 15% SOTO set-aside requirements. And SOTO operating grants are awarded once per development and or activity. Obviously, if you submit a new application and it's for a different project, you are entitled to come in for SOTO operating funds and certification for that individual project. But it's one and done once you get an award for that individual project. At the time of submission of the home application, all applicants must provide proof that they have adopted the following plans, including all cross-cutting requirements: the anti-displacement relocation plan, affirmative marketing plan, fair housing plan, minority and women's business enterprise plan, Section 3, excessive force policy plan, the 4-factor analysis, and the Commonwealth's affirmative marketing policy. Currently, DCED is drafting Violence Against Women Act policy for emergency transfer situations. That will be coming out in the next month or so. Those of you that are funding rental housing developments or maintaining rental housing developments, this is going to be critical to you. The Violence Against Women's Act is a piece of legislation that was passed, and it is applicable to federal funds in the home program. More on that later, but I just wanted to keep you up to breast that we are going to be coming out with a policy to address that. Special applicants must also comply, successful applicants must also comply with the home assurances and special conditions. I would encourage you to please, just because there's a signature line and a date on it, when you have your chief elected sign that, I think it's important that you should look at the detail in that statement of assurances. Make sure that your chief elected understands exactly what he or she may be signing. It's pretty much at the application stage, assuring that if your application gets to contracting, that you will meet all the provisions and federal regulations that are attached to the home funds in question. Obviously, your home contract will contain a lot of that information as well, but to prepare your chief elected and possibly boards for what is pending and what the compliance requirements are going to be, I might suggest a 15-minute overview of that with the person that's going to put their Jane Doe or John Henry on that document. The overview of the home application process will continue. Applicants must provide documentation of need, program activity design descriptions, and detailed management plans. Units of local government submitting a home application that also lists other sources of funding to support the home application's activity applied for must provide proof of the other funding commitments at the time the application is submitted. Additionally, applicants must demonstrate projects can be completed in a timely manner. Again, there are both home program commitment requirements and DCED contractual requirements that need to be met. If you are submitting multiple applications to DCED or other state agencies for funds to support the activity in your home application, the other funds must be committed at the time we review the home application. We will not hold home applications or wait on the possible award of other competitive program funds to review the home application. If proof of commitment is not provided for the other non-home funding at the time the home application is submitted, unfortunately, we have no choice but to deny the application. Our underwriting standards, requirements, and policies that are passed down to us from HUD requires us, prior to awarding any funds, to assure that all funding commitments are in place prior to awarding home funds. It's not a choice that we get to make. It's a regulatory requirement, and we will follow that going forward. All applicants must use the forms provided in the most current home application guidelines, no exceptions. So if you have documents that have been downloaded from past home applications, especially like a home budget summary sheet or other documents, statement of assurances, for example, I'm just encouraging you to get rid of those documents or save them somewhere where you're not going to be using them for submission with a current home application. We will not accept those. That will not be accepted. We hope you understand that. Environmental review information for our, I apologize. It is also very important to note that the start date of DCED's home contract is backdated to the date of the conditional award letter. DCED provides 60 days via the conditional award letter for UGLUGs to provide us with the necessary and required ER information for our review and approval. Competitive program awards then need the approval of the state treasurer, comptroller, right to know office, DCED legal, our executive office, regional office, and finally even the governor's office. So there is bureaucracy involved in the award of contracts, and that 60-day window, in 99% of the cases that we're funding, unless you're doing an activity on previously undeveloped or undisturbed land, 60 days should be sufficient. You could be pushing that limit into the 55-day window till we get it, but that's okay as long as we get it within 60 days. With the level of transparency and accountability required of public funds, to get contracts approved is necessary in this day and age, and rightfully so. So, hence the need to apply for what you can reasonably demonstrate you can expend and on completed activity. So when you're thinking about submitting an application, look at your own past performance for what it is that you have applied for. And I can tell you, if you have applied for rehab funds in the past, let's say, and you have not been successful in timeliness, and you've been granted extensions, and you're coming in for a new application, we here in this office, we review the reports that we have available to us to see if your ask is consistent with what you've expended in that 3 years. If not, we reserve the right to cut that amount of application funding award back, and it's going to be based on your past performance. And I also want to make sure everybody understands that we don't differentiate in terms of our review. If you're untimely with housing rehab and you haven't expended your money and we had a recapture, and there could be any one of a number of reasons: local staff capacity, loss of personnel, difficulty with finding applicants for rehab, whatever the litany of excuses is, we're still going to look at that application and contract that was passed, and that's going to be our litmus test going forward for your track record of success. That's how we're demonstrating, and that's how we're showing HUD that we're providing the necessary review of past performance and risk analysis associated with any contracts that go out the door now. Okay, DCED's program and policy priorities for home. Of course, the home program is administered in accordance with the requirements of the National Affordable Housing Act of 1990 as amended, 24 CFR Part 92, which is the home regs, or the final rule as you often hear it referred to, the Uniform Administrative Guidance of 24 CFR Part 200 as amended, and all other applicable laws and regulations. In addition to the above, all potential applicants must confer with their respective DCED home grant manager prior to submission. What I mean by that, I don't expect you to send our grant manager an email saying, hey, we're going to submit an application. You actually need to speak with them, confer with them, give them the opportunity to listen to what your project or your application will consist of, and allow them to provide their expertise in helping you meet that mark. They will go over the requirements of the application with you, and then following that conversation, you will get a confirmation email from the home grant manager for your respective county. Make applications for activities that are consistent with the DCED home program priorities. If you submit an application that does not address one of our home program priorities, in other words, if you submitted an application for TBRA to us, it will not be funded. You can only submit for what we are calling our priority activities. Complete and provide all documentation in the appropriate appendix for the selected activity. So again, that would be Appendix 1, and whatever activity you're pursuing locally, whether it's rehab, rental, or home buyer, you must complete all applicable forms in the appendix in question. Applicants seeking funds for existing owner-occupied housing rehab or home buyer down payment and closing cost assistance only activities Funding will be limited to a maximum of $500,000 for towns, boroughs, or townships. Cities and county applicants are limited to a maximum of $750,000. Again, it's important to note that the home program is a competitive grant program, and not all applications received will be funded. Also, if an award is recommended, that award amount may not be for the amount requested in the home application. And again, that's why I'm asking you to look at your own track records for what you've been able to expend if you are a consistent applicant for home funds, because we're going to look at that information, and that's certainly going to drive the award process for us if your application meets the mark. Applicants seeking rental housing, new construction or rehab, or home buyer new construction funds will be limited to an amount needed to address the funding gap not met by other committed sources of funds. Applicants must assure the funding gap does not exceed the home per unit subsidy limits for the metropolitan statistical area in which you reside or your unit of local government is situate. Priority consideration will be provided to municipal applicants seeking home funds on behalf of nonprofits that meet both the 15% Community Housing Development Organization CHOTO set-aside requirements and are certified by DCED for the home CHOTO set-aside project in question. DCED is now limiting, and this is in red on your slide for a reason. With the grant-based accounting, it's much different from the FIFO years. If you are a long-term practitioner, you know what I'm talking about. Grant-based accounting has limited our ability to move funding around from various fiscal year contracts. So we are required to now, whatever we award out of a contract, it's grant-based accounting for the fiscal year home contract in question. We will limit administration to 6% of the actual funds expended on completed activity. So in short, if you would receive a $300,000 award, you are entitled to 6% or $18,000 only if your $300,000 was expended and you, of course, completed the activity that you have applied the home funds to. If you only spend $100,000 of that let's say for existing owner-occupied rehab, you only expend 1/3 of that contract amount. You then are only entitled to 6% of what it is you expend on completed activity. So if you expend more than that and we recapture your contract funds at the termination of the contract date, we'll be asking you to refund that from non-federal sources. So I just want to make sure you're all aware of that, because that is something new. Actually, we instituted that last year. It was part of the website, the webinar last year. We're just making sure that we go over that again today. As you can see, other federal and state requirements is the NEPA of 1969, Davis-Bacon Act, if it's 12 or more home-assisted units, the Uniform Relocation and Real Property Acquisition Policies Act of 1970, often referred to as URA, the Pennsylvania Prevailing Wage Act of 1964, as amended, and as you're probably all aware, that is a Pennsylvania Department of Labor and Industry Act, and any questions or issues with the State Prevailing Wage Act should be shared with the Pennsylvania Department of Labor and Industry. PADCD floodplain policy, no activity can occur in a floodway, period, and no new residential development can occur in a floodplain. Rehab activities may occur in the 100-year floodplain, provided the jurisdiction participates in the National Flood Insurance Program and the prospective applicant has or obtains flood insurance. And there's also other requirements that if it's rehab particularly, you should look at our housing rehab guidebook for the requirements for addressing rehab on units that are within that 100-year floodplain. There's the Pennsylvania Agriculture and Land Preservation Policy. I'm not going to read that. I don't want to read these slides verbatim, but you can certainly look at that. We will make the PowerPoint and, again, the webinar recording available to our website in the coming weeks. The website address is listed on the next slide, and along with the PowerPoint and the slides, there is a litany of resources available to you on that website. I would encourage you to look at that website for, of course, our application, reporting forms, housing rehab guidebook. There's a number of different items of the subsidy limits, the income limits. There is a number of different resources and assets available to you on that website, and I would ask you to please look at that. The home program application overview, section 2. I'm going to turn this over now to Dave Jordan and let Dave take you through some of this.
Good afternoon, everyone. We'll go ahead and get into the actual application submission itself. As has always kind of been the case, you do need to submit the electronic single application when you're submitting an application to DCED for funding. This is covered in Appendix 1 of the general application information, and keep in mind that not only does the ESA application need to be submitted, but you also must copy the signature page from the electronic single app and include it in your hard copy application that is submitted to DCED. Keep in mind that hard copy needs to be into DCED by October 5th, close of business, which is 5 o'clock, not simply postmarked. We need to coin a phrase, having our grubby little paws so we can start working on it as quickly as possible when your application is submitted. When you are submitting an application and you are wanting to submit for more than one priority activity, you need to keep in mind that you must submit the general application information twice, once in each of those priority applications that you're submitting for, and in the general application section, the general application description form will need to be updated to what the application activity is you're submitting that application for. That is the one form that is not a blanket form, the way your resolution, which could cover both of your activities, or your 4-factor analysis, which would cover all of your activities. The general application description form covers each individual priority activity that you would be submitting an application for. When you are submitting your application, you need to, on your cover sheet, indicate that the application is for the DCED home program. You need to name your home priority activity, the name of the applicant, because that could be a nonprofit, it could be a for-profit developer, the municipality or the county that the application is coming from, and the date of submission. Keep in mind as well, and we did not get a lot of these in the last application round, that each activity in your application needs to be tabbed out for us to be able to follow what the various pieces are compared to the table of contents. We cleaned up the pictures a little bit this year. We actually have some more formal photos of what the application looks like. This is a copy of what the application packet is, which you've seen when you got the CD&H alert that was sent out earlier this month. You should consider only printing the home application guidelines that you're going to need. There's no need to print out every appendices. Only the general application information appendices, which is appendices 1, and the particular priority activity that you're submitting for. Again, this next slide shows you what the entire packet looks like. And the next slide is the general application information, Appendix 1. This is standard application information that's been required with all applications. If you're submitting, and I've mentioned this already, if you're submitting more than one application for different activities, this information will need to be duplicated for each activity, and the general application description form will need to be changed as necessary for the particular activity type. Here is what the general application description form looks like, and as you can see up at the top, it says, are you submitting for CHODO? Are you submitting for home funding? What is the priority activity that you're submitting for? Is it rental development? Is it homeowner rehab? And then down below, again, depending on the activity that you're submitting for, you will incorporate your budget into that as just a general overview of what the budget is for your activity. With rental housing, that's Appendix 2 now instead of Appendix 1. You will need to submit your neighborhood market analysis, the required pro forma that's available on DCED's website in the library. Pay particular attention to the project narrative, your management plan, local staff capacity, and certification of capacity. These are the areas where you will make your case for why your application should be funded. And this will hold true for any priority activity submitted. Make sure you have a construction schedule that is realistic, as home staff will be using it as a tool to measure capacity and performance against commitment and expenditure requirements in your three-year contracts. Remember, too, with the rental housing development Appendix 2 application, that does require home match, and there is a home match financing plan as part of that application package. As you can see from the next slide, this is where we pulled out for each of the individual activities what the particular table of contents is for the Appendix 2. And as you can see, though it's rather difficult looking at this particular slide, it must be tabbed out in your application submission with all applicable information, and there is a significant amount of application information required. Appendix 2 is first-time homebuyer, or Appendix 3, I'm sorry, is first-time homebuyer, acquisition with or without rehabilitation. First-time homebuyers to be conducted by CHODOs or other developers must provide in the application evidence of site control for properties to be acquired. When we're looking at first-time homebuyer acquisition with and without rehabilitation, there are actually two components. One could be your program, local program design is such that you have funds available for first-time homebuyers and they find a property, they come to you and say, I would like to purchase this property at this address. Or it could be a CHODO set-aside type activity, or it could be a developer who wishes to purchase properties, renovate them, and then resell them to potential first-time homebuyers. In that second case, in that second situation where you have a CHODO or a for-profit developer that is looking to acquire properties, renovate them, and resell them, they do need to have identified and have site control of those properties they're going to purchase.
So I just want to point out with the site control, you know, the purchase option is probably your best way to pursue that. If you are looking to construct either new rental housing development or single-family housing development, we're not asking you to go out and purchase property prior to receiving home funds. We understand, and we would encourage you not to do that in case your application doesn't get funded. What we would ask you to consider doing, though, is getting a purchase option agreement in place, and that would be provided to us. And of course, there will be a time period for you via that purchase option agreement to close on that land, and that would then help you if you're looking for acquisition as part of your home contract funds. That would help you to pursue that. Plus, I also want to just remind everyone, if you would engage in acquiring property prior to the home contract award, and it's public knowledge that you're going to acquire this property for development of affordable housing through a home program, your environmental review would need to start with that. So don't get too far ahead of yourself in the acquisition piece of property. Again, if it's property that was acquired through like a tax repository judicial sale, and you've acquired that property and you've been sitting on that for several years, no problem. But what I'm talking about is where we're saying site control, we need to see some form of site control either in the form of ownership or a purchase option agreement that has a time frame listed in the agreement, so when we award the funds, we're sure that you'll close on that property in a sufficient amount of time. Thank you.
The Appendix 4 is the weatherization deferral program, which, as Mike mentioned earlier, is no longer a pilot project, but it is something that if you are so inclined, you could submit an application to do weatherization deferrals. Keep in mind that if you do submit an application for weatherization deferral activities, you need to document in your case files that you received the referral from the weatherization program. If that documentation is not present when the contract is monitored, it could result in a finding in potentially repayment of funds. The weatherization deferral program was established so that when someone applies for weatherization and there are found to be code issues in that property that weatherization cannot address, this provides a means and a tool for that property to be brought up to code standard and then allow the occupant of that property to have their home weatherized by the weatherization program to potentially assist them in saving funds on their utility bills after the weatherization work has been completed. Appendix 5 is our standard existing owner-occupied housing rehabilitation program, which many of you have been operating for years. Again, pay attention to the narrative, the management plan, local staff capacity, certification of capacity, and your budget. This, again, is where you make your case for your ability to administer your housing rehabilitation program. As has been mentioned on numerous occasions with the last application round, and we've already talked about again today, is apply for what you can comfortably expend in 3 years. These contracts are going to be 3-year contracts. So if you can spend $500,000 in 5 years when they were 5-year contracts and had to ask for extensions because you couldn't do it in a 3-year time frame, don't apply for $500,000. If you can comfortably expend $100,000 a year over 3 years, your application should be for that $300,000 amount.
I want to just point out that part of the what David had just touched on, it's also important to note that we're going to include into the Appendix A of home contracts going forward, there's going to be a special condition language because we're dealing with grant-based accounting funds, which limits our ability to recapture and get those contract funds back out to another unit of local government. In our review of your month-to-month and year-to-year performance and expenditure rates, if we provide you with a home contract, and we'll use that $300,000 figure, of course, we're looking for, you know, obviously you divide 3 into 300,000. We're looking for $100,000 worth of expenditures, not commitment, expenditures a year. We're also looking at, you know, where you're at and your progression of that. Obviously, if you're 18 months into your contract and you're at less than $50,000, DCED is going to reserve the right to allow you to finish the projects that are currently under contract, and we could recapture, if need be, the remaining balance of your funds that are untimely. And this is being done again. We refuse to allow the Commonwealth to lose any money. We don't want funds going back into the national pool of home funds to be used by other states. We want to maximize our potential on getting those funds committed and expended locally within Pennsylvania. And so I encourage you to really give some thought into applying for what you reasonably and be assured that you will expend, and understand that the only test that we have will be the monthly reports and documentation that you're providing to us. If you need help with something, technical assistance, if there are issues preventing you from going forward, do not wait. Contact us. Get us in the loop early so we can offer whatever assistance we can to hopefully get you on track. But if it's something that prevents us from seeing a light at the end of the tunnel for you, we will have the ability going forward to recapture those funds if they're not being expended in a timely manner. For those of you who may also apply for and receive emergency solution grant funds, you'll have an idea of what I'm talking about with timeframes and those not meeting those performance standards.
Again, just as an example, the slide that's on the screen now is what the table of contents for Appendix 5 looks like. Not quite as extensive as what it was for rental housing, but there's still an awful lot of information that is needed there. And again, looking at your project narrative, your needs assessment, your project description, your program administration, these are items that allow you, when you're doing your application, to really make your case for why your application should be funded. And the more information you can provide, particularly related to who your development team is, as far as who's going to be administering, who's going to be doing your construction, et cetera, is most important and imperative. Next slide is Appendix 6, which is single-family affordable housing, new construction. Again, very much the same narrative, capacity, budget, and what I would like to do is now get into a couple of cleanup items. You've all seen the program, the Home Monthly Report. It has been updated, and it is much more comprehensive. We would like for you to submit it back to us in an Excel format, not converting it to a PDF, because there is some information that we need to be able to easily add to it as we're reviewing them. We also would like for you to, whenever you're doing your monthly report, update that little box that talks about how many requests you've had for assistance. If there becomes a situation where you're having some problems with expenditures and you're showing us that you're getting a lot of contacts, but there's some issues related to getting those applications completed, that allows us to have discussion with you as to where we can maybe offer some assistance to get you back on track. If you begin processing an application, you should go ahead and put it on the activity list and start checking the boxes so that we can see where you're at. We don't want to wait till you're 6 months in before we see any activity where you've been already processing applications. We need for you to start filling that out as soon as you can. Not saying that each contact for information or each contact for a request for assistance ends up in the activity checkboxes, but at least when you start processing those applications that it looks like you're going to push them through, start filling out the boxes so we can track and monitor that as well.
Yeah, you also have the ability, so if you start checking boxes, let's say you do the initial intake and you qualify the applicant, and of course the preliminary discussions and conversation are you're going to go forward with the inspection, the lead assessment, et cetera, and we want you to check that box for the income, and if it doesn't progress forward, if for some reason the homeowner backs out, whatever, that you can always mark that activity canceled, okay? And there won't be any issues with us. We just want to be able to, number one, track what your efforts are locally, because that helps us in determining what it is you're running into, number one. And number two, we don't want you to award a local contract to start, or excuse me, we don't want you to wait to award that local contract to start filling out the boxes on the checklist, okay?
And right now, I think there are 35 rows on that sheet. Most of you are doing 10, 12, 15, so that's probably enough rows. But if you need more, we can always add more for you. I know there are a couple of grantees that do have large contracts that they're executing on for multiple jurisdictions, so you may need some additional lines. Next item for update is we are going to be updating a very minor update to the Housing Rehabilitation Guidebook. In regards to the Housing Rehabilitation Guidebook, there's going to be a page 38 added. We actually hope to have a guest speaker today because I know you're tired of listening to Mike and me all the time to talk about manufactured housing. There are specific requirements and guidelines that our Manufactured and Modular Housing, Factory Housing and Building Standards Division oversees related to moving a mobile home or a manufactured home and setting it up on a new site.
I just want to fill in a little bit. On manufactured housing, we ran into a situation locally with one of our, with a manufactured housing unit, and our rehab property standards for existing owner-occupied rehab was the standard for this manufactured housing. Our manufactured housing division right here at DCED came over and talked with us about habitability standards for manufactured housing. Is also part of the Uniform Construction Code, but it is different from standard property maintenance codes like we have listed in the Housing Rehab Guidebook. So what this boils down to and entails is simply this. If you purchase a manufactured housing unit, it must meet a certain Pennsylvania spec to be sold and placed in the Commonwealth. The other issue is if you buy that modular or manufactured home in, let's say, Dauphin County where we're situate, and you would move that to an area, any other county in the Commonwealth, the code official from that next municipal jurisdiction does not need to accept that unit for placement if it doesn't meet the manufactured housing habitability standards. There are also foundation requirements for manufactured housing, and this would include mobile homes. So we're simply listing a link for our manufactured housing division. There are habitability guidelines for manufactured housing that would be used on, again, mobile homes and or manufactured housing. And there are also foundation standards guidebook via that link as well. And there's also contact information for our manufactured housing division, who of course are the experts in terms of the property standards and foundation requirements. All other requests not related to those two issues would come to us. But if it's technical assistance with manufactured housing in terms of habitability standards or how you go about securing that manufactured housing unit to a foundation, you would need to speak to our manufactured housing division. We also may explore in the future, nothing has been decided yet, how we can do one-for-one replacement on some of these mobile homes that are, quite honestly, may be in such disrepair that they don't warrant the investment of any home funds in them to try to bring them up to those habitability standards required of manufactured housing. It may be cheaper to replace that housing unit in a one-to-one replacement issue. We're exploring that. We're working on that now. And so for those of you who may be listening in today, where you may have large populations of mobile home parks, et cetera, you may be able to capitalize on this component of the home program. It's also important to note that HUD has relieved some of the ownership requirements in terms of the land that the mobile home may be situate on. So previously it required a 99-year lease, and of course most landowners would not provide that to the people citing a manufactured home on their property. What the rule now states is basically that the landowner must provide a lease equal to the affordability period for the investment in question. So for home buyer, obviously that could be as little as 5 years or as many as 15 years, which gives you a lot more flexibility locally. So this is something we're exploring. We don't have anything yet, but I would hope to be able to provide some information early next year, and we may have a pilot program strictly for manufactured housing and or mobile home replacement.
Next, this slide shows you where you can find the manufactured housing information on the DCED website in the library. And the next slide is what they look like. So if you're looking for them, you can find them. And then the last but not least, this is your home team now. I think many of you have been working and talking with all of us at this point in time. Any questions you have, contact any one of us.
There's the county assignment list. Obviously, PJs, you're not listed. Home PJs are not listed on our balance of state county assignment list. Home PJs, if there's any home PJs on the list, you can certainly talk to me. My contact information is, of course, there, and I will then refer you to the grant manager of choice from that point forward. I want to thank all of you before we depart. I want to thank all of you for working with us on the oversight we're providing with the monthly reports, PRO2s. I know you have received visits from all of us in the monitoring phase this year. Every one of us has or is still monitoring. We appreciate your hospitality and cooperation and assistance with us. We know we're working on some of the KPMG backlog of monitoring reports. And again, we appreciate your assistance, patience, and cooperation as we work through those. They are critical to, again, clearing any issues that are prevalent so we can award contracts without worrying about capacity issues from past monitoring findings or questions of performance and or administrative comments. Again, you are certainly welcome to post any question that you may have, and we as a collective staff here will review those questions and we will provide answers and we will post them on our website at the same time that we record or post the recording of this webinar along with the slides. However, if there's something, a burning question that you may have, obviously you do have our contact information. It's available to you on the screen that's currently up. I would suggest that you reach out to that person if you can't wait for the Q&A, if it's something pressing. Again, I want to remind everyone, October 5th is the deadline, so start looking at your calendars, your unit of local government meeting schedule. Make sure that all your ducks are in a row so you're ready to submit that fully executed application by October 5th, and then we will be in good position to review and hopefully recommend your application for funding. And that will conclude our webinar for today. Again, thank you very much for both registering and being part of the webinar. And again, we will follow up and document the questions and our answers to those questions in the coming weeks. And have a great afternoon and enjoy the sunshine for a change. At least it's nice here in Central PA. Have a good day.